Is the Sabbath a ceremonial law? Impossible. And I'm going to prove it for you today. This notion that the Sabbath commandment, which is the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments, is a ceremonial law, goes something like this. The Sabbath is a ceremonial law. All ceremonial laws were fulfilled or abolished at the cross, and therefore Christians or Gentile Christians, or maybe even any Christians, including Messianic, are not supposed to keep the law. It was given as a ceremony. This is Ask the Sabbath Lady. I'm Elizabeth Farah, and I am so happy that you're here. If I could be of help to you or anyone else in learning to keep the Sabbath holy, that's what I want to do. And I want to help you learn to defend the Sabbath biblically. In other words, discipleship and apologetics is what we're about here at Ask the Sabbath Lady. So the question of the week really wasn't sent into me as a question. It was a comment that I saw, and I've been dying to address this particular idea for some time. The answer to the question is no, 1,000 times no. And I'll go even one step further and say you wouldn't even have to argue from the biblical text in order to prove that was the case. But of course, that's what we're going to do. I'll put it another way. Again, it's impossible to conclude that the Sabbath is a ceremonial law unless you meet one of the following two criteria. One, you're just repeating what you've been told or you've heard for years, and you've never taken the time or even thought it was necessary to take the time to explore it and verify that yourself. It's just an accepted thing that's common. Well, we've all done that, so I understand. The second group of people would be those whose theology requires the Sabbath to be a ceremonial command in order to fit within the construct of their theology. But I'm going to prove that the Sabbath command is a moral command, like the rest of the 9. So let's bake this cake. Let's get straight to definitions first. What does the term ceremonial mean? What's the definition? Let me read that to you. Marked by, involved in, or belonging to ceremony, stressing careful attention to form and detail. Stressing careful attention to form and detail. But this is not going to be a controversial definition. It's not questionable what a ceremonial commandment or the term ceremonial means. So what's a rite? A rite is a prescribed form or manner governing the words or actions for a ceremony. It's essentially the same thing, speaking of the same thing, or the ceremonial practices of a church or a group of churches. I don't know why it says church there in this definition, which is from Merriam-Webster, because it should be a rite or a ceremonial practice would be relating to any religion. So what is a religion? Of or relating to rites or ritual, ceremonial. So we get the picture. They're all pretty much the same. Ceremonies require prescribed words or actions, things to be done or said in a certain mandated way. Right here, we could be bringing this teaching to a screeching halt and close it out. Why? Because it's very clear from that definition that the Sabbath command does not conform to it. But don't go away, because this misunderstanding and unbiblical idea is so pervasive, and we need to settle it categorically. Because whether you keep the Sabbath command, want to keep the Sabbath command, believe it's biblical or not, we don't want, and I know you don't want to honestly continue in a misunderstanding. Why? Because whether you keep the Sabbath command, whether you want to or don't want to keep the Sabbath command, you want to honestly, with integrity and intelligence, interpret God's word. And if you allow yourself to incorporate an unbiblical understanding into your systematic or into your theology, that's just going to build or be the foundation for further unbiblical ideas or theologies. It will build and build and build and create ultimately great error. So let's nip this at the bud and let's explore it further. Think about this one question. If the Sabbath is a ceremonial law and all ceremonial laws are fulfilled or abolished, then this establishes a hermeneutical framework which will affect every interpretation that you have of the Torah, of the commandments, of anything that came before the cross, including and all of the teachings of our Messiah, Jesus. So this has great import, doesn't it? So let's analyze the Sabbath command in light of ceremonial, rite, and ritual as definitions. Let's go first to Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. That's the Sabbath command. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. What does holy mean? Set apart, distinct, consecrated, sanctified, severed from the rest. There's a distinction made. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord Jehovah thy God. And in it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy maidservant, nor thy manservant, I got that backwards, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Hallowed is another name for sanctified, consecrated, to be made holy, set apart, or set aside, distinguished, severed. So the command is, in short, this: don't work. Or, in one word, cease. Don't do anything. So are you thinking what I'm thinking? That's a weird ceremony. You do nothing. You have to go nowhere. Those are not prescribed words or actions that must be adhered to. There are no prayers. There's no fasting. There are no processions. There are no confessions. There's no candle lighting. There's no prescribed readings. There are no sacrifices. There's no temple. There's not even a secret handshake. So this could be getting a little tedious, because I could continue to list all the things in the world that are not being prescribed as a ceremonial ritual rite of the Sabbath. At this point, do you think the Sabbath is a ceremonial or is not a ceremonial commandment? Could you put that in the comments below? Let's just take a vote of those who are watching right now. Is this ceremonial or not ceremonial? I heard a sermon once in which the pastor said that every Israelite had to go to this temple every Sabbath. So I just bring this up because it's so absurd, but I'm just worried that if I don't, somebody might still believe that. That's categorically wrong, incorrect. That is nowhere in the scriptures. And just logically, as an aside, reason tells you that people living in the Golan Heights or around the Sea of Galilee or up in Dan or by Haifa today, whatever that was, thousands of years ago, could not conceivably have gone to the temple every Sabbath or even regularly. So I just wanted to get that little guy out of the way. It was just very strange. There is no verse that tells you you don't have to go to the temple on the Sabbath. So it's hard to prove from the scriptures because it's not there. I guess that's a good reason. It's hard to prove a negative, is how it goes. But there is actually a related passage. So in Exodus 23, 3 times in the year, all thy males shall appear before the Lord Jehovah. That's it. 3 times a year. And you probably know that already, but let's just review it. No women or girls are required. I doubt the elderly are required if they're infirm or too old, and probably infants because that would require moms to go when they had when they couldn't make that trip. So of course they wanted to go. Most people, this was a great joyous feast, but nevertheless, only men were required to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year during the feast. That's it. Now, I mentioned the things you are not being told to do, but let's ask this. Are there any priests or other authorities required for you to keep the Sabbath? Simply put, no. Absolutely not. Now, remember that definition that I gave you. That's the repeated or a variation on the Sabbath command given multiple times. There is no priesthood brought into it, no religious authority of any kind. But you say, what about all those priests and all that stuff they did on the Sabbath? Certainly, it's part of the Sabbath command. Well, firstly, I'm just going to mention the 10 commandments clearly do not bring the priests in. But it's not just the 10 commandments. In Deuteronomy, when the 10 commandments and the commandments are all given again, the Torah commandments, that's not brought into it either. I will tell you what is. They were doing all kinds of things on the Sabbath. True. But before I answer that, ask yourself this question. What is the deal with the priests and what did they do on the Sabbath? So that's a good question. I'll ask you one. What did the priests do every single day, 365 days a year? They kept the menorah lit. They burned incense. They baked bread and they placed it on the table of showbread. They made offerings and sacrifices. This was the responsibility of the priesthood every day of the year, every day of the week. That includes the Sabbath, of course, because they are doing the ministry of God, just like a pastor, priest, or a rabbi does at least once a week, on average, as a minister of God, teaching the Word of God. Yes, You could call that a work. It's called a good work. And it is holy work. Why? Because for something to be holy, it's set apart for the service of God. Just like the Sabbath, just like God's people, because God is holy. So the priests were doing holy or good works on the Sabbath. And as we know, God commanded them to, and that's a good thing. Now, as a matter of fact, it was a little different on the Sabbath, which you might be interested in. So I'll just mention it very quickly. On the Sabbath, that's the day that the bread was put on the table of showbread. Well, I think that's interesting. Maybe you do or don't. Also, on the Sabbath, unlike the rest of the days of the week, the priests offered 4 lambs without blemish every Sabbath. So 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening. Normally, it was 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. There was also flour and olive oil and the drink offering. They also offered fine flour with olive oil and also wine. So let's look at the commands of the priesthood. The duties of the priesthood were commands for the priesthood, not for people of the tribe of Issachar or Judah or Benjamin or Naphtali, just the Levites. Their inheritance was the Lord, says the scriptures, and their work was a holy work. They received no inheritance of land, so they did not farm, and what they did required commandments specifically intended to direct them in their good work toward God. But were non-Levites allowed to make sacrifice? No. As a matter of fact, anyone who attempted such foolishness would pay with their life. The Levites' calling was a sacred calling and not for anyone else. Remember, all the firstborn males at Passover were redeemed for the priesthood. They would have been the priests, but the Levites, and particularly Aaron's line, became the priests and the ministers to the priests. So because the priests have a law that is indeed a ceremonial, ritual law that governs their daily work, does that apply to the keeping of the Sabbath by the people? Clearly not. So have I proven the following 2 points? The Sabbath contained no rites, rituals, or ceremonies, and therefore is not a ceremony. And the priests' duties on the Sabbath were merely an extension of their duties the other 6 days and were not to be performed by the people. And if they didn't perform those duties, the people would still be keeping Sabbath and not breaking it. One was not dependent upon the other. But I have a funny thought. Why is everyone so concerned about this ceremonial law? Now, I'm not trying to reinstitute sacrifice. That's not my point. It's just a point of logic or perhaps motivation that I want you to at least hear the question. Is there something terrible, inherently terrible or distasteful about ceremony? Well, firstly, the ceremonies that were committed to the priest to keep, perform, God, Jehovah, gave those to them. So I don't think we need to take a disdainful, as I hear and see constantly, attitude toward these often called rules and regulations, like these micromanaging rules and regulations of the Old Testament. Those are the commands of our holy God. And what he called them was not ceremonies or rituals, he called them judgments and statutes. Judgments meaning this is what he judged to be his right for the people to do unto him, whether it be the ceremony of the priests daily, offering lambs and the rest of the sacrifices and offerings, or the people keeping their Sabbaths, including all of the Levites and priests who were the majority, who were not working in the temple in their course once a year or twice a year. But I'd also like to mention 3 words: baptism, the Lord's Supper, and Sunday church. If ceremony is distasteful to you, we have to deal with the fact that we have ceremony in the church proper today. And most of all, what occurred to me is the irony, the utter complete irony of this. The Sabbath was never a ceremonial command given to the people of Israel, of the household of God, of the household of faith, the congregation or assembly of the saints. Today, we have ritual in the body of Messiah, Christ, every Sunday, worldwide. And it's accepted without the blinking or batting of an eye. And that's okay to everybody. But those very same people, a certain proportion, and I would say it's probably maybe a majority, would say that this ceremonial law of the Sabbath was abolished. That's not for Christians today. Isn't that ironic? Add to it baptism and the Lord's Supper. And you've got ceremony in the church body today, and those very same people reject the non-ceremonial moral law of the Sabbath, the 4th command. Wow. It doesn't get much better than that. Those practices, baptism and the Lord's Supper, are the very definition of ceremony. And they're argued about. And also Sunday church services. Okay, so I'm going to go through these real quick for a moment. Baptism. What do you say when you baptize? Where do you baptize? Is it a pool? Is it a baptismal font in a church or a tank in a church? Who performs the baptism? And when should baptism be given? Should it be given after they have attended certain kinds of classes so that they can be confirmed in the faith? Or is it immediately, like the Ethiopian eunuch? Well, that's just a baptism. What about the Lord's Supper? Is it grape juice? Is it wine? Is it every Sunday? Is it intermittently? Do you go to confession beforehand? For Catholics, do you pray beforehand? Does the pastor need to give sort of an explanation or recite the words of Jesus on or right before or during the time that the communion is being taken? Do people walk up to the front? Do they sit in their seats? And do they eat the little tiny crackers that are all broken up, or leavened bread? But then let's go to church. That's a biggie. And don't object or be offended when I say that church is ceremonial, even for non-ceremonial churches. And I know that doesn't mean that it's liturgical, but let's just run through it. Virtually every church has an order of service. There is The first thing that's done, the thing that's done thereafter, the third thing that's done. How many songs do you sing? What kind of songs? What kind of instruments do you allow? Do you allow any instruments at all? Who picks the music? Does everyone sing or just a choir? Choirs or individual worship leaders? Can the worship leader be a woman? Oh, that's another question altogether. Then we have the idea of liturgy, of course, or does the pastor preach? Does he preach? Is it just the head pastor? Is he preaching through the scriptures or preaching whatever he feels like preaching? Is he preaching according to a denomination? And we haven't even begun to discuss all the other, because, well, and you know what's going on in the church today, people rolling on the grounds and doing all kinds of crazy things. I don't know what you call that, but I would say it's ceremonial. I'm sorry. It's just really, I've thought about this question for a long time, and I've thought about, the ironies and how absurd that I believed, from the biblical investigation that I had done, that clearly, it's just obvious that the Sabbath was not a ceremonial law. Thinking about the mounting absurdity upon absurdities, that I can see people this Sunday gathered together and ceremonially taking communion, baptizing people, and praying certain prayers, singing certain songs, and doing an order of worship. And then, wait a minute, then the pastor gets up and does a sermon about how the Sabbath's been done away because it's a ceremonial commandment. The most important thing I'm going to teach you comes next. So please, after my laughing jag, don't go away. This is the key, the foundational understanding. What is the Sabbath doing in the Ten Commandments? That's a big question. I'm going to give you a short answer. So many modern day people find it incongruent. It seems disjointed or out of place. It seems like, what is that song? One of these things is not like the other. One of these things is not the same. And then you're supposed to pick it out. I think that's Sesame Street. The first four commands, as Jesus confirmed, and he gave those first four commands, were the expression of faith and love and service to God. These four commands are progressions from the first to the fourth. It's just a continuum. In the first commandment, we affirm the identity of our God, Jehovah. The second command prohibits us from adding service to multiple gods, as is common in the ancient world, of course. No, most people had no problem with adding a god or two or subtracting. But let's keep in mind the idolatry of the modern world and remember that many add the idolatry of other gods to their worship of the one true God. The third commandment is very special and misunderstood, and I cannot wait to go in deep on this particular subject, but it's amazing. This command was an affirmation of the taking of Jehovah's holy name in the betrothal ceremony or the covenant ceremony at Sinai. In this marriage ceremony, ironically, the bride took the bridegroom's name. And the command was not to take that name in vain. This is not about using the Lord's name lightly or improperly. And yes, I would say that that it's fair to put that under that that heading. But by far, this is about the people of God taking his name and not taking it in vain. So the command goes on to say, the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Have you ever wondered why the command had such a strong admonition there? More so than the idolatry, second command. Do not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Do not say, I am Jehovah's. I worship the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am a Christian or a Messianic. And then blaspheme or profane his name by sinning amongst the nations and the Gentiles and bringing his name to shame. That's what that third commandment's about. Lots more. So we as Christians know that that betrothal that we each individually take when we become born again, we grab hold of that covenant and become the future bride. You know, we're the betrothed bride now, but then the marriage supper of the Lamb is to come. And we all covet that idea, don't we? Well, the fourth commandment is an extension of the first three. On the seventh day, God's holy people, and what is that? To be set apart, because our God is holy. This is what Peter reconfirms, quoting from the multiple times that it's given in Leviticus and elsewhere. We, God's people, his holy people, are to set apart ourselves and set aside our mundane daily tasks and our ambitions and the things that we do to live our life, our work. We set that aside in order to have fellowship, sweet fellowship with our Lord, to whom we are betrothed. And we're to do that in joy and thanksgiving and love. And that's the kind of thing every bride wants to do with their bridegroom. So there you have it. It's not a rite. It's a relationship. It's not a ceremony. So what do you think? Do you think I answered that correctly? I'd be interested, even if you thought it was pretty good, if there's something that you think I should have included that I didn't believe I had time for, or maybe some brand new thing I hadn't thought about, please let me know. I want to hear your comments, especially those who disagree with me. Well, maybe not especially, because I value you both. But those who disagree with me, challenge me on any of this. I dearly want to engage with you. Especially, I would ask that more of you come over to YouTube than from other sites and engage right here on YouTube. So subscribe, like if you liked it. Please don't. No, you can do that if you want. And please subscribe and hit that bell and put some stuff in that comments below and share this with your friends and family. It's been so great. Bye-bye. You have a lovely day.